My name is Vivienne, and I am 36 years old. I am a master horologist, micromechanical engineer, and luxury antique watch appraiser. I spend my days under the bright halogen lights of my sterile workshop, wearing a microscopic loupe, analyzing the gear trains, turbulins, and escapement wheels of some of the rarest timepieces in human history. I can look at the bridge of a watch movement under a microscope and tell you if the Geneva stripes were etched by a master Swiss artisan in 1920 or by a computerized laser in a counterfeit factory. Last week, in my world, time leaves a distinct, microscopic signature, and auction houses pay me fortunes to ensure that the fake never passes for the genuine article. But I never imagined that the most deceptive counterfeit in my entire life was the man I had stood across from at the altar. 3 years ago, my grandfather, a legendary collector, passed away and left me his crowning achievement, an ultra-rare 1933 Custom Complications platinum pocket watch. It was a mechanical masterpiece worth over $4 million, but to me, it was a priceless piece of my family's history. My husband, Julian, was a luxury watch broker whose high-end boutique had quietly gone completely bankrupt due to illegal offshore sports betting. My cousin, Marcus, was a disgraced former jeweler who had been blacklisted from the Diamond District for swapping clients' genuine gems with synthetic stones. I mistakenly believed that Julian's sudden weight loss and late-night panic attacks were just the results of a tough retail market. And I thought Marcus's sudden presence at our home was an attempt to rebuild family ties. In reality, they were looking at my grandfather's pocket watch like a golden ticket to erase their compounding criminal debts. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was supposed to be in Geneva, Switzerland, serving as the keynote speaker at an international horological convention. But a widespread digital radar failure at the airport grounded all international flights for 48 hours. I took a local train back home, arriving nearly a full day ahead of schedule. The house was entirely silent from the outside, but as I walked through the side entrance into the mudroom, I noticed the heavy air filtration system in my private basement restoration lab was running at maximum capacity. I slipped off my shoes and crept down the carpeted stairs, the soft hum of the machinery masking the sound of my approach. As I reached the reinforced glass door of my lab, I saw that the security camera indicators had been completely covered with black tape. I paused in the dim corridor, my heart hammering against my ribs as I peered through the narrow viewing pane of the door. Julian and Marcus were standing under my heavy laboratory magnifying lamps, surrounded by micro screwdrivers, watch oil solvents, and the velvet-lined tray that held my grandfather's priceless pocket watch. I pulled out my phone, switched it to absolute silence, and activated the high-definition video recording stream, positioning the camera lens through the glass gap to capture every movement and word. Marcus was using a highly specialized suction tool to carefully lift the original, historic 1930s gear movement out of the platinum casing, while Julian held a gleaming, identical-looking modern replica mechanism in a pair of brass tweezers. Julian whispered in a tense, sweating panic, asking Marcus if he was absolutely sure the external serial numbers on the counterfeit movement matched the original engraving. Marcus let out a cold, confident laugh, telling Julian that the Chinese superclone factory had replicated the microscopic hand engravings perfectly, and that unless someone took the balance wheel apart under a macro lens, it was visually indistinguishable. Marcus stated that the private buyer in Dubai had already transferred $4.5 million into their untraceable cryptocurrency wallet, which would clear by tomorrow morning. Julian replied with a chilling, detached voice, stating that once they shipped the genuine internal movement tonight, they would stage a mock burglary at the lab next week, claiming the watch was damaged or stolen, allowing them to collect a massive insurance payout while leaving me completely devastated but entirely clueless. I stood in the cold hallway, a wave of profound fury and nausea washing over me as the absolute depravity of their plan became clear. The husband who had held my hand through my grandfather's funeral and the cousin I had grown up with were systematically dissecting my family's legacy, planning to sell its heart to a black market collector, and framing my business for a fraudulent insurance claim. The emotional impulse in me wanted to kick the door open and scream, but my analytical training completely took over, turning my mind into ice. I knew that if I interrupted them now, they would claim they were just cleaning the watch, and the real movement would be hidden where I could never find it. I needed the criminal transaction to be completed, so the chain of custody would be legally ironclad. I silently backed away, walked out of the house, and drove directly to the federal building downtown to meet with an FBI agent from the art crime team whom I had previously assisted. The following morning at 10:00 a.m., I walked into my house pretending to have just arrived from my delayed trip, looking intentionally exhausted. Julian was sitting in the living room, casually sipping tea as if he were the most supportive husband alive. He greeted me with an elaborate display of relief, kissing my cheek and asking how the Geneva event went. I looked him directly in the eyes, noting the subtle twitch in his left eyelid. I sat down across from him, pulled out my tablet, and opened the live video file from the previous night, turning the screen directly toward him and pressing play. The sound of Marcus's recorded voice instantly filled the room. The private buyer in Dubai has already transferred $4.5 million. The superclone matches perfectly. Julian's face went completely gray, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his teacup, shattering it against the floor. Marcus, who had just walked out of the guest room, stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes dilating with terror as he saw the video playing. Julian lunged across the table to grab the tablet, screaming that it didn't matter what I recorded, because the genuine historical movement was already shipped out of the country. And there was absolutely nothing the police could do to recover it. I stepped back, completely unbothered, and explained a fundamental rule of horology that their amateur greed had caused them to overlook. I revealed to them that because of Julian's erratic behavior over the past few months, I had anticipated a security threat and had already removed the authentic 1933 mechanical movement weeks ago, placing it in a secure bank vault downtown. The pocket watch sitting in my laboratory safe was an identical, non-functional aesthetic prototype I had built for an upcoming museum display. Furthermore, I explained that the internal casing of that prototype had been coated with a specialized, invisible synthetic tracking fluid. The moment Marcus opened the case, the fluid chemically bonded to their hands and micro tools, glowing a bright, unmistakable neon blue under any standard ultraviolet light. They hadn't stolen a $4 million Swiss masterpiece. They had stolen a worthless prototype, but because they had signed a digital bill of sale for an international transaction, they had just committed federal wire fraud and attempted grand larceny. Before Julian or Marcus could even speak, the front doors were breached by 4 federal agents and 2 local police officers. The video recording, combined with the live tracking of the cryptocurrency wallet and the glowing chemical evidence on their hands, gave the authorities everything required to execute an immediate arrest. Marcus began weeping hysterically, throwing his hands in the air, while Julian was slammed against the wall, the heavy steel handcuffs clicking tightly around his wrists as he stared at me with pure, venomous hatred. 6 months later, the legal destruction of their lives was complete. Because the fraud involved international borders and electronic wire transfers, the federal judge exercised the maximum sentencing guidelines. Julian was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. His boutique liquidated entirely to satisfy his gambling creditors. Marcus received de facto expulsion from the jewelry registry and a 5-year prison sentence for his role in the criminal conspiracy. In the divorce settlement, the criminal fraud clause allowed me to strip Julian of every remaining joint asset, protecting my grandfather's legacy and my business reputation completely. My grandfather's watch remains completely intact, ticking flawlessly inside its vault. Now, whenever I sit at my bench, looking at the microscopic gears of an antique timepiece, I am reminded that cheap counterfeits can never withstand the pressure of time. People can fake their devotion, their honesty, and their love for a little while, but under the lens of truth, the gears always jam, and the fake is always exposed.